Scott Pilgrim is a 6-part comic/graphic novel series by Brian Lee O'Malley, released between 2004 and 2010. It follows the titular Scott, a Canadian bass-playing, video game-obsessed slacker who just so happens to be proficient at kicking all kinds of ass. When Scott falls in love with an American delivery girl named Ramona Flowers, he discovers he must battle and defeat her 7 evil exes if he wants to date her.
Pilgrim! Hey, buddy! Save it! You're pretentious. This club sucks. I've got beef. Let's do it. Wait. Wrong move, baby.
The series became so popular that a Hollywood motion picture was put into production before the final volume of the series was even released. This actually caused the ending of the movie to be reshot, as it didn't line up with the conclusion that would eventually occur in the final volume of the books. In 2010, the same year that the movie was released, a side-scrolling beat-em-up came to the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, and whilst it did receive relatively good reviews, it went on to become somewhat of a cult classic with its audience. It was delisted from marketplaces in 2014, which meant if you were yet to buy this game, it was no longer available, and fans have been clamoring for it to return for close to a decade. A fun fact to note is the name of the franchise as a whole is simply Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is the name of the movie and this game, but is only the title of the second volume of the book, with each other volume titled similarly but somewhat different, such as the first being Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life. I, for one, recommend checking them out. Now, here we are in January 2021, and Scott, Ramona, and the rest of the colourful cast are back on Xbox One, PlayStation, Switch, PC, and Stadia. Rebranded as the Complete Edition, this version of the game comes with all the previous DLC that was available for the re-original, which includes characters like Knives Chow and Scott's roommate Wallace Wells, as well as game modes such as Boss Rush, Dodgeball, Battle Royale, and Survival Horror.
Anyone who has played classics like Streets of Rage or Final Fight will be right at home with how Scott Pilgrim plays. In classic 2D side-scroller style, it gives you a choice of character to play, each of which have a slightly different moveset, offering you a degree of replayability. One downside is that the combat, like many other side-scrolling beat-em-ups, certain enemies have attacks that are pretty much unblockable and can stun lock you, meaning that in the worst case scenario, one mistake can lead to you taking a lot of damage. While annoying, this is somewhat of a trope in this genre, and probably stems from back in the day when these games were all in the arcade and wanted you to pump in more coins. This doesn't work like that here, of course, but sometimes it can feel like you were hit with a somewhat cheap death. Now, unlike a lot of these classic games, however, you have a sort of RPG leveling mechanic, meaning the character actually gets stronger as you play, and no doubt die, meaning the game will progressively get easier, and thankfully so, as it is quite a challenging game. Starting out, the game is so hard that you can't really get very far, and you will likely find that you die a lot, which can be frustrating for a lot of people, but as long as you're not the type to rage quit, you will quickly realise that as you level up, you're making more and more inroads into the game. Now, as well as leveling up, you also collect money as you beat enemies and access bonus levels to collect even more money. You can use this to buy items that will replenish your health, or buy extra moves to make your character kick even more ass than before. As this game is a love letter to the 90s, as you would expect, weapons will also be available to help you with the smashing of heads. Wait till you see the little nod to Super Mario Bros. 3 when you reach the level select screen. It'll really get your nostalgia senses tingling.
Online play was one thing seriously missing from the original version of the game at launch, and was one of the things most reviews noted as an overall detriment. It was added later on, but here in the Complete Edition that problem has been rectified from day one, and online play is very much present. Games of this genre are always more fun to play with friends, and now the arena is wide open for multiplayer outside of classic couch co-op. You also have the Survival Horror mode, which is a 1 health bar, no lives scenario. where you have to defeat as many zombies as you possibly can, aiming to set a high score in a classic arcade game fashion. Another mode on offer here is Dodgeball. In this mode, you can't actually damage the enemies with your fists, instead it's about taking them out as fast as you can with the ball, so you'll be trying to time your punches, keep hitting the ball back at them as much as you can, basically keeping them in a juggle combo state to maximise your time. These additional modes are really nothing more than fun little distractions that admittedly most players will try out a few times and then probably never revisit, but having a few extra modes to try out is never a bad thing.
The soundtrack for Scott Pilgrim could possibly go down as one of the greatest video game soundtracks of all time, at least in my head. It's like you've been transported back to the 90s and are listening to someone squeezing the absolute best out of the limitations that 90s hardware lumbered developers with. Coupled with the fantastic visuals, it feels like you're playing the very best of 90s arcade games had to offer here, with every track matching their levels to perfection. Honestly, this soundtrack is so good, I wouldn't be surprised to hear that you shot off to Spotify after playing just to re-listen to your favourite tracks all over again.
The art style is a great combination of pixel art and a cartoony style that lines up really closely to the comic's source material, while still giving off the feel of a 16-bit arcade game. Brian Lee O'Malley was actually involved in the development of the project and created concept art and sketches for what will become the final end-level cutscenes you see in the game. This is a real treat for big fans of the franchise. As a huge fan myself, when I played the game for the first time in almost 7 years, I was easily able to pick out characters from the background and know who they were from the comic books. Everything is bright and colourful, and the enemy design is interesting and varied, especially the monstrous Super Gideon final boss, who feels like something right out of an old school action game. As mentioned throughout this review, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is both a love letter to the 90s and fans of the franchise. As a huge fan of the books and the movie, as well as games of this genre, I feel it delivers on every aspect that I was looking for, and the inclusion of online co-op from day one is the icing on the cake. This game is both challenging and rewarding, and really has one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Play it alone or play it with friends, and either way you're going to have a good time. Overall, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the complete edition, receives an Evil X busting 4 out of 5.